Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and today we are taking a look at a Walther P99, specifically here a first generation, first year of production P99. This is a pistol that I think is a lot more interesting than people realize, and I think it's a pistol that's been overlooked a bit. Its impact, its importance, and the design that went into it is more interesting than a lot of people think. So the backstory here, we're going to go back to Walther, World War II. In the end of World War II, of course, firearms production in Germany is shut down. The Walther company survives by partnering up with Manuron in France to do collaborative manufacture. Of course, some of Walther's facilities are actually now located in East Germany. They go on actually essentially producing the same things that they're making in West Germany, or would be. They make copies of the PPK and the P38 and to some extent the Luger. In West Germany, Walther is doing pretty much the same thing. It would survive for several decades on legacy designs, the PP, the PPK, the P38. Now, by 1981, when the P38 finally went out of production at Walther, it was being called the P4, which actually that dates back. They made the P4 for a while. The P4 is just a P38 with an aluminum frame. Today's video is generously brought to you by Guns, the company whose very name now apparently is a YouTube Terms of Service violation. Awesome, way to go. They are, however, one of the cool online places to pick up something new for your own collection, for hunting, recreational shooting, competition, whatever it is that you prefer to do. They have a huge inventory both on their own, in their own warehouse, and through a nationwide network of partner FFL dealers. They have also recently partnered up with Silencer Central to do suppressor sales, and from now until the end of the year, they're offering a buy one get one free deal on Banish suppressors. So get one of sufficient value and it will come with a free Banish 22K V2, little mini 22 suppressor. You do have to pay for the tax stamp on both of them, but beyond that, cost the suppressors free, and Silencer Central is set up with FFLs in every state where suppressors are legal, so once it comes through approved from ATF, it can be shipped directly to your door, which is kind of cool and convenient. Of course, Guns is also planning to have a bunch of Black Friday and Christmas deals, so make sure to head over to their website, sign up for their newsletter so you don't miss out on anything. In the 1970s, they realized clearly they're going to need some sort of new product to garner interest if they actually want to survive as a company and sell pistols to military and police, who are the primary markets for their handguns. So they developed the P5. Now this is part of German police pistol procurement. It's developed in the mid-70s, 76, 77, and it's actually produced from 1979 until I think 1998. It's in production for about 20 years. It's a reasonably successful gun for Walther. It's designated the P5 because it goes into these German pistol trials where it meets all the requirements and it's approved. And this is an interesting trial where instead of picking one winner, the German federal government just determined which guns of the submissions met the requirements and then approved all of them for use by German police. And then individual agencies could pick whatever gun they actually wanted. So Walther's P5 was approved, Sig Sauer's P6 was approved, and Heckler & Koch's P7 was approved. That's where you get those three designations. Anyway, the problem with the P5 for Walther is it was still an old-fashioned sort of handgun. It was better than a P38 for sure, but it's all steel, it's hammer-fired, it's very expensive for them to manufacture, it's a complex action, it's not a simple Browning action gun. I'll do a video on a P5 at some point, but it's not a long-term successful strategy for Walther. They need something else. So they start poking around for new ideas. They develop the P88. That's in production for just a couple of years. They make less than 10,000 of them. It's a little less expensive. It's less complicated. It's a standard Browning action gun, but it's still all steel. Less than 10,000 guns is not a commercial success, certainly not to the extent that it's going to keep the company alive. The next thing they try out is the PP90, which is essentially a locked breech 9x19mm iteration on the PP. That thing's a complete flop. They make a total of 7 prototypes, never goes into production, and then they basically go bankrupt. Without any better products, without anything novel, any real opportunities in the market, Walther just runs out of money. They're not bringing in enough to cover the bills. And so the company essentially goes up for sale. And there's a lot of interest from a couple of different people, especially people outside of Germany, and that's where Umarex comes in. Umarex is an airgun company located in Germany, whose owner-president is very proud to be German and really likes German firearms and recognizes the long history that Walther has as a German company and thinks it would be a huge shame if a German company like Walther gets bought out by a foreign buyer. So he and Umarex step up and purchase the company. I think there's a lot of people maybe don't understand why an airgun company would buy a real gun company, and the answer was Umarex existed as an airgun company because there was a viable market for it, and the owner of the company really liked real guns too, and jumped at the opportunity to purchase a big, long-term, well-known company like Walther. So once Umarex purchases Walther, they're now in the exact same situation that Walther had been before. They need something new to go to market, but what Umarex does, or what Walther does under Umarex ownership, is step up the R&D and develop a truly modern, forward-looking pistol, and that is the P99. This is now a striker-fired pistol. It has a polymer frame. It's the first polymer frame that Walther did, and it has a number of elements that are really first of their type. So let's dig in here and take a closer look at what the P99 is. All right, P99. Let's take a look at the markings to begin with. I'm just going to work my way around the gun. Interarms out of Alexandria was the importer at this point, made in Germany. We have a very early serial number there. This is 9x19. Typical Reed safety manual. We're getting into that era of handgun development. Walther banner on the grips, and kind of an interesting bit of checkering design. Very small little dots on the grip. Over on the other side, we have a Walther banner and a P99 designation. The style of this stuff would change a whole bunch of times over the course of production without really matching up to any internal changes in the guns. They just made a bunch of different marking designs. On a polymer framed pistol like this, we're used to seeing, usually you'll see a serial number plate here. On the P99, they put it in the back of the grip, so that's the serial number. This is actually a loaded or a cocked indicator, sorry, not loaded chamber. So when I rack the gun, that sticks out. That tells me it is cocked. And then this gets us straight into one of the most interesting, the most fundamentally interesting aspect of the P99 system, which is that while it is striker fired, it is essentially a double action, single action gun, because once it's cocked, we have a really quite short trigger press for a striker fired gun, and then a really short, for any kind of gun, reset. So that's reset, it's cocked again now, and I only have to let the trigger out that far to reset and fire again. It makes for very easy follow-up shots. Now, if I have been shooting and the gun's cocked, and I want to put it back in a holster, and I don't want it to be in this light single action trigger mode, I have a decocking button on the top of the gun. Not a lever, as you'd typically expect, but a button right there. Push that in, it releases the striker to go forward, not firing of course, but just drops the striker forward, so that now this is in a double action firing mode and has a really long trigger, like that, like you would expect from a DA SA gun. But that decocker is kind of a unique, unusual feature, certainly for the late 1990s, mid to late 1990s. The magazine release is an ambidextrous sort of paddle or lever here. You push it down to eject the magazine. This one is a 1997 production gun, first full year of production, which means it was manufactured during the US assault weapons ban. So marked P99 there. In 9 Parabellum, this holds 10 rounds, and it's deliberately blocked at the bottom because magazines that held more were not legal to import or manufacture at the time. Like many other pistols, in particular the Glock, if the striker is cocked, and you can see it is back here, I can't take the slide off. So for most guns, that means the first step, or the next step in disassembly, is to dry fire it to drop the striker. And that's something that a lot of agencies, a lot of people, weren't a huge fan of, the idea of having to pull the trigger in order to disassemble the gun. It's not inherently unsafe. You just actually check to make sure the gun's unloaded before you do it. But it's becoming pretty common today to require disassembly without a trigger press. Walther allowed that back with the P99 by simply hitting the decock button. That drops the striker down, and then I just pull the slide back slightly, pull this disassembly tab down, and then the slide comes right off the front. We have a full polymer frame here with all the fire control parts inserted. Just to put this in context, thanks in large part to the polymer frame, the P99 had a manufacturing time requirement of like 25% as much as the P88 that preceded it. So this was a massive manufacturing cost savings for Walther, and everybody else was doing the same sort of polymer frame pistols at the time. They were experiencing the same sort of cost savings, which brought the cost of service pistols down. Now you'll recognize these today. Of course, these are interchangeable backstraps so that you can make the size of the grip different to fit your own hand. That's a pretty typical thing today. The P99 was actually the first pistol to do it. So it's not quite as simple of a system as it is on some pistols today, but we have a roll pin down here, and I just need to press that roll pin out. And they give me this handy little tool to do it. And then I can lift out the grip insert and put in whatever one I prefer. There's the really huge one. Fills up a lot of that area. For what it's worth, like, I don't have super tiny hands. I normally think I have pretty average size hands, but for me, the smallest grip module is definitely the most comfortable on the P99. So that's the one that I use. Anyway, pick the one you want, put it in, and then just press that roll pin back into place. The trigger mechanism was fairly modular on the P99, and Walther offered a bunch of different options. So this one has the standard double action, single action, you know, exactly what you would expect. They also offered double action only versions. They had a pre-tensioned version, so that was kind of like, not quite SA only, but the typical striker fired feel where every trigger press is the same. They had an anti-stress version. I believe the issue with anti-stress is that here on the originals, if you put much sideways pressure on the trigger, it can catch back here. And I think they were concerned that under stress that was happening to people. This one's not really susceptible to it. I wonder if it's been updated since. I don't know where this pistol has been for its whole lifetime, but there we go. In theory, you put some side pressure on the gun, the trigger safety back here that prevents it from firing just... We do, by the way, have a trigger safety here. So the front of the trigger pivots right like that. And if it doesn't pivot, it won't actually fire because this leg of the trigger hits the polymer right there. So that's a drop safety. If you're pulling the trigger, you never even notice it, and you can't really help but to make that little pivot, which then allows the trigger to depress in. But if you drop the gun, inertia is going to pull it back from here, and it's not going to fire. At any rate, you could accidentally trigger that or engage that if you put a bunch of side pressure on the trigger, and the anti-stress changed the trigger design a little bit to prevent that. Going up to the slide assembly, this is pretty standard stuff. We've got a self-contained captive recoil spring. That's nice. It's a Browning tilting barrel style of pistol, so that's all exactly what you would expect. All right, inside here we have sort of the mandatory, for all practical purposes on modern pistols, firing pin safety. So if this is not pushed upwards into the slide, the firing pin can't go forward. If I push that in, instead if I push that in, I can then get the firing pin to protrude. And that safety is deactivated by this section of polymer rail in the gun. So when the slide's all the way forward on that, it depresses that safety. I can then take out the rear face plate here. There we go. The striker spring is also self-contained. The decocker button is not, by the way. But the striker spring is self-contained. That's it. That's all there is to it. Rides inside there. And what's going to happen is, when you decide to decock the pistol, when you push this down, it's actually this lug right here. that is going to hit the top of the striker here. This part is being held by the sear, and if it is pushed back and you push down on this, it's going to drop down and disconnect below the sear that is holding it back in the frame. So pretty basic system. And there you go, one field stripped Walther P99. Now, there would be a second generation P99 introduced in 2004 at the same time that they launched the compact. The biggest the three major elements that changed on the second generation are, first off, the proprietary rail up here was changed to a standard Weaver rail. Secondly, there's sort of a hump in the trigger guard right down here. And the idea there is to prevent the shooter's finger from getting potentially pinched between the bottom of the trigger and the trigger guard while still having a nice big trigger guard. But they changed their mind and got rid of that hump with the second generation guns. And then on the second generation, the slide stop becomes an ambidextrous component. So the magazine release always was ambidextrous. The trigger obviously is. They never did bother to change the decocker to become ambidextrous because that's just not that important. But they did add an ambidextrous slide stop with the second generation. The P99 is introduced in 1996, goes into production in either late 96 or early 97. It's a little vague. I've had a hard time finding any guns dated 96, but first year of production seems to be 97. At any rate, even before it's fully in actual production, it's being used in the entertainment industry because Wulf-Heinz Pflaumer at Umarex, huge fan of James Bond, recognized the importance of essentially entertainment industry marketing. And he hand-delivered a P99, a pre-production prototype P99, to Pierce Brosnan on the set of Tomorrow Never Dies, and essentially convinced him to make sure that the script rewrote the P99 into the film. There's a line in it where Bond says something like, the new Walther, I've been asking Q to get me one of those, which is obviously marketing gold for a company like Walther, where their financial success really depends on this brand new pistol. So what better way to get it a good running start than to have James Bond use it? At any rate, gun goes into production in 97, and it would stay in production until just a year or two ago. Walther kept trying to retire it and having to make like the final edition, and then we promise this is actually the final edition, and then the double secret super final edition. It is now out of production, but it lasted 25, 30 years. There were a whole bunch of different varieties made. There were a number of other versions of it, like licensed versions of it. In 2008, it was licensed to Radom, the factory in Radom, Poland, for manufacture. There was a collaborative model made from, I think it was like 1999 until 2006 by Smith & Wesson called the SW99, where Smith & Wesson actually made the barrels and slides and Walther made the frames. The most interesting part about those is Smith actually offered this in 45 ACP, which Walther never did for the P99. The P99 was offered in 9x19 Parabellum, 9x21 for the Italian market, and 40 Smith & Wesson. Of course, 40 Smith & Wesson was at the height of its popularity during the height of Walther P99 production. There would, of course, also be a wide variety of triggers, like we talked about. The P99 Compact was introduced in 2004. There was another license-produced version done by Magnum Research from 2011 to 2015. That was called the MR9 Eagle, of course, because everything Magnum Research does has to be called the Eagle something. You could get these in 3 different colors eventually from Walther. Black, like this one, green, and also a sand or tan color. There was really a surprising amount of options around the P99. And like I said at the beginning, it's a gun that I think a lot of people underappreciate. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this look at a gun that hopefully you didn't know as much about as you do now. Thanks for watching.